And for a while that would have been George's bedroom, but eventually my sister Carol and I shared that, and George's bedroom was at the back of the house. This street, George played football literally morning, noon and night. It was endless. That's all he ever did. Football, and eventually when Mum and Dad had the money to buy him a bike, but really football. Christmas time he got football top, football shorts, seldom football boots. He eventually got football boots one Christmas because they were so expensive. But he used to play, I don't know if you call it the same in Manchester, we call it curbsy here. You throw the ball and hit the curb. George did that with a tennis ball. He kicked the tennis ball. And I have a cousin Lewis, they used to hang about with Lewis, and my Uncle George that I mentioned earlier. And Lewis used to say he used to check his foot. He said he just couldn't understand how he did it. Time after time after time, he kicked the tennis ball and hit the curb, and it came back to him and landed at his feet every single time. He just practiced endlessly. Now, I'm not sure, maybe we should walk up to the top of the street, but obviously the big field, as we call it, at the top of the street is where Craiga Boys Club would have played. I think I have a photograph somewhere here of George and the Craiga Boys team. But that's where George would have played for Craiga Boys Club. And the very last house on the corner, you can't see it from here, you see that last window at the top of the street on the left? Yeah. Underneath that there's like a storeroom, and it was called Jack's Stores. Nobody knows why, but it was called Jack's Stores. And that's where the Craiga Boys Club used to change. And in the middle of winter it was cold, miserable, grey walls, cement floors, wooden benches, and the kids no shower, anything like that obviously, and the kids used to go in there and change to play their match in the big field, and that's where George was discovered by Bob Bishop. My mum in those days would have taken the kids up hot Bovril at half time in the middle of winter, and in the summer would have taken them up oranges. Now that was quite a thing because Mum did that from her own pocket, and in those days we seriously had very, very little money. I remember my dad telling us that he used to have to cut cardboard out to put in his shoes because they leaked. I mean, we really, really lived on a very, very tight budget. Mum used to also do the football strips for the lads, the red and white, and Mum was so fussy about the laundry. All of her life she would have been like that. And she used to boil the white jerseys, but she used to put them in the boiler and keep the collars out in case the dye would run from them. So that's where George was discovered by Bob Bishop, and that's when that's the famous line when he rang Sir Matt and said, "I think I found you a genius." Also at Jack's Stores, there was a little lock similar to that, and that was George's target practice, and with his tennis ball, endlessly. And I don't know what the statistics would be, but I would say he probably hit it 99% of the time. But he used to just practice endlessly. Up round the corner, there's a lot of shops called Greenaway. Dad was always very fussy about getting George to, if you're going to be a good footballer, you have to use both feet. George would go up and draw a line on the gable wall and practice hitting the line with his right foot and his left foot and his right foot and his left foot. He just lived for football morning, noon and night. I heard a story a few years just before Dad passed away. I used to get so frustrated because Dad would come out with these wee stories, and I said, "Why did you not tell us that before?" Didn't think it was important. And he was going to bed one night, and said George was in the back bedroom. This is Mum and Dad's room here, and he heard George talking to somebody, and he thought, "You bugger got somebody in this house," because in those days you didn't bring anybody in. Well, you were allowed into the hallway, but it wasn't a done thing to bring people in. Really, people were very private in those days. And I heard George talking to somebody, but he eventually worked out he was talking to his tennis ball. I said, "Dad, I don't believe." He said he was talking to his tennis ball, and he said, "I'm going to make you do what I want you to do." And he did. So that's just a wee bit of the story about Mum and Dad well, not so much Mum, but we were brought up very, very strictly. You were brought into the house. In the summer, we were in bed. We used to be standing like three wee ducks in a row at that bedroom window. And all our friends were out in the street. And I remember a neighbour saying to Mum one day, "Oh, Mrs. Best, you should not let them out." And she just said, "You mind your business, I know where they are." And it was a routine in our house. You were brought in, didn't get a bath every night because, finances didn't allow it. You got a wash at the sink, you were put into bed. Summer or winter, it didn't matter. But in the winter months, Dad mainly, but sometimes Mum would have had to go and call George in because it was getting dark, because we weren't allowed out after dark. But every spare minute was spent playing football. So this is the house that he left at the age of 15, this time in 1961, at the age of 15. And I'm sure lots of you have heard the story about how Mum had to run down the Craiga Road, as we say, to buy him a pair of long trousers. That's the truth. George didn't possess a pair of long trousers. And this is the house that he left in the summer of 1961, and this is the house that he left in the winter of 2005. So for that reason alone, I mean, you can understand the sadness that we feel that the house is being sold. We've tried very, very hard to keep it preserved. We've been to the National Trust, who were very interested, as you all know, I'm sure the Beatles, the Beatles homes have been, I don't know, 2 of them I think have been preserved in Liverpool. Yeah. The National Trust were prepared to help out in restoring it back to its original 1950s, 1960s, but they weren't prepared to actually buy it. So from that point of view, sadly, the family home will have to go. If I had means and ways of buying it, I would. I've looked into it, but just at the moment I can't. So I'm thinking, it's been on the market for quite a while, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's an open, maybe it's not meant to go. Not yet. I've so many other things to get in my mind that it's difficult to focus on everything. But for me, as I say, this is where George left as a boy of 15, and this is where he left at the age of 59 for the last time. And as you know, it was George's wish that he came back to Belfast and was buried with Mum. And I don't know how it's done in England, but in Northern Ireland it's changing now, but way back in the olden days, as I call them, bodies were always brought home, bodies always rested in the home, but now it's all funeral parlours. And my poor father couldn't understand why, because of all the hype surrounding George's funeral, why we just couldn't bring him home and keep him here. Because he was only flown home the night before the funeral, or the day before the funeral, and he then rested in the family home. I'm sure you've all seen the photographs of this garden. It was, I couldn't describe how many thousands of tributes. And what we find very, very special is that we had, you know, the troubles that we have here with Catholics, with Protestants, we had women, with men, with children, with people from all over the world who came, with people who flew from all parts and parts of the world just to simply come to the funeral. I could write stories people have told me about how they actually got there to ensure that they came to pay respect to George. So this is where he left the family home. And what time is it? I was sort of hoping 1?
Yeah.
I'm going to speak to the bus driver. What I was hoping was to take the route that the funeral cortege took, so that you could have a look at Stormont. I'll speak to the driver because the final stop is Roselawn. It says, "Dear Mum and Dad, well, what about yesterday? I suppose you know by now. I've enclosed some cuttings from the Pink. I nearly died when the boss called me into his office and said I was playing. I was talking to Harry Gregg before the match and he said the boss was going to play me last week. It was a fabulous experience coming out of the tunnel before the match. The left back was a madman. He nearly broke my flippin' ankle. I've been to the ground for treatment this morning. It's a beautiful day here. There's nothing much to report. I had a great chance of playing tomorrow night, but now I'm injured. I've had it. It's great to see your name in all the papers over here. I'll close now. Love to the girls. Your loving son, George." That was obviously, that letter was written referring to his debut game against West Brom in 1963.